If your webinars look boring, then this is for you. Your audience comes to you to learn more about a topic or to engage in a discussion in a community. But if the whole experience is boring, then they may not actually stay in the webinar or they may not come back for the next one. So, as a webinar organizer, as an association, you have to make sure that you create content, you create webinars on topics that are interesting for your members. But not just that, but the delivery of the webinar itself is also engaging and exciting for everyone. So here are my top 3 secrets that you can take away to make your webinars much more engaging than they are right now. By the way, I gained a bit of belly fat last couple of months, so I'm trying to walk it off right now. Let's get started. Here are my top 3 secrets. Secret 1. The opening scene. You want to open the webinar with something very exciting. You want to grab the attention of the audience as quickly as possible so that they can anticipate that there is an exciting webinar coming up for them. There are many ways of doing that. Some people like to just post a question in chat saying, can you please post where you're joining from, which city and state? That is one way. That is perfectly fine. But that's probably the simplest way of doing it. If you are not comfortable with something more advanced, then just do this. Just post a question asking the audience to type where they're joining from. This is perfectly fine. But what I find is that one of the best openings to any presentation or a webinar is actually by sharing a story. Do you have a story you can share from your life? Something that you have done that is related to the topic of the webinar. Maybe something you tried and you failed, maybe an experiment you did, or maybe there was something that happened that was very exciting for you or very intriguing for you and your team. If you share those story and then you share your raw emotions, what did you feel? The pain, fear, frustration, what did it mean for you? If you actually do that, then it's actually much more engaging for the audience. There's something about stories that hook people. So if you can open with a story, it will be very, very powerful for the audience. But then you need to ask the audience, what did they think about the story? Did it happen to them? How can they relate to this story that you had? And ask them a follow-up question, right? So get the audience engaged in the follow-up question related to your story or related to the topic, or you can simply ask them, okay, so now that you know the story, can you please tell me why did you come to this webinar? What do you want to learn from the webinar today, so I can keep my topics more focused? So you can ask a question like that. But the whole idea here is that you need to engage the audience right at the very beginning, right? So the story and then a follow-up question. So in the follow-up question, when someone starts engaging, you actually take that, you repeat that in the webinar, you build on top of the topic, and you ask more people to share a similar experience. Once you actually get your room warmed up with the opening question and you see everyone is typing, they're chit-chatting, you will be able to break the ice. So this, what I call, is an icebreaker for a webinar. You need to make sure that you are paying close attention to the icebreaker at the very beginning. If you can engage the audience at the very beginning, then the audience will be engaged throughout the rest of the webinar as well. If you lose them at the very beginning, then you lost the audience for the rest of the webinar. So again, you need to open the webinar with something very exciting. Secret number 2, you need to earn the attention of the audience every 5 minutes. You do that by sharing a lot of stories during your webinar. Yes, it's possible to make even the most boring material exciting by sharing the right amount of stories. For whatever reason, stories hook people, and if you can tell the right amount of stories, it will keep your audience engaged throughout the entire webinar. So what you want to do is every couple of slides, you want to share a story on that topic. You can share your experience working on that topic. You can share how that particular material impacted real human beings. You can share stories about your clients, your members, or anything else altogether. The best type of story is a hero's journey. What is that? We see hero's journeys everywhere, in movies, shows, everywhere. So at the beginning of a hero's journey, a hero actually faces this humongous challenge and he doesn't know what to do about it. Then step by step, the hero overcomes all the obstacles one by one, and at the end of the whole show, the hero appears triumphant. The hero wins over all the challenges and we have a happy ending. This is a hero's journey. If you can do that, if you can start with an opening challenge and then you share how you have solved all the different problems and end the webinar with a happy ending, or with a before and after scenario, that what happened after, then I think that will be a very engaging story for the audience altogether, and you will be using the hero's journey. Now, you cannot share too many stories. You want to actually focus on facts as well. So you have to mix in some stories and some audience engagement. So what you can do is that if you can give the audience a quick activity right at the beginning of the webinar. So not at the opening, but then like say around like at 20 minutes. If it's a 1 hour webinar, then within the first 30 minutes, you want to give the audience some activity, a quick mental exercise, a quick worksheet that they can fill in. Give them something to do, like get them to think. When you do that, then the audience gets engaged with the activity. The activity has to be simple enough that people can relate to. Don't give them something overly complicated, because then people will not be able to like finish it within the couple of minutes that you have in the webinar. You also have to make sure the audience is interacting with you, so you need to ask the audience the right amount of questions. So you can ask the audience two types of questions. Number one, they're open-ended. So you ask the audience, what are your thoughts on this, or what is your experience on this? You have to keep in mind that the open-ended questions are difficult for the audience to answer, because they have to formulate their thoughts, they have to come up with an idea, formulate their thoughts and formulate their sentences, and they have to type. Again, they're typing in front of a huge audience. Maybe there are hundreds of people in the room, maybe there's 40, whatever. They're sharing the material in front of a lot of people, and they want to be right, so they need some time to formulate the words. So you do not want to ask too many open-ended questions. You want to ask a few, maybe one at the beginning, one at the middle, one at the end, no more than that. You want to limit the number of open-ended questions that you ask. What you want to do is you want to ask more confirming questions. So for example, you share this huge challenge that you have on the topic, then you ask the audience, how many of you face the exact same challenge? If you face it, type challenge on chat. Give them the word they have to type challenge. Or in one of my recent webinars, I was talking about why webinars are actually, many webinars flop. So I told them, if you have seen it before, type flop on chat. And many people actually typed flop on chat. I gave them the exact word, so the person, the audience does not have to think too much about what to type, and they just type one word. You can actually use this many times. If you can use it again and again, maybe like 4 or 5 times during the entire webinar, your audience will be really engaged and the chat window will just light up. Now, the last thing is that if you see that there is one person or a few people who are heavily engaged, they're typing away on chat, or they have a lot to share, bring them on the microphone. You may have to like invite them a few times, you may have to help them, tell them to come on camera, tell them to unmute, whatever. If it takes you 1 minute to help the person to unmute and then share their ideas, that's still fine. 1 minute may feel like a lot in the middle of a 1 hour webinar, but that's perfectly fine. You want to get that highly engaged person to come on mic and get them to share their experience. And once one person have done that, you can ask others if there's anyone else who wants to share their experience. Secret number 3, stage some activity for the audience. If you have other team members who are in the room with you in the webinar, maybe your colleagues, maybe the organizers of the webinar, get them to pitch in, get them to chime in whenever there's silence in the room. So if you ask the audience a question and people are not answering, then tell one of your team members to just jump in and write something on chat. This is an icebreaker once again. Once there is some activity on a question, other people will actually type in as well. And if you ask a question and you want people to speak, come on mic, you can actually get your team members to unmute and talk with you as well. So we don't want the overall webinar to be a monologue, we want it to be a dialogue. So if the audience is not engaging, if they're not talking, then your team members can fill in the gap during the webinar. And once your team members are talking, other people will actually have the courage to speak up, and they'll be sharing their ideas as well. So staging some activity is perfectly fine, but you only want to do it to fill in the silence, fill in the gaps that are there in the room. If the audience is already engaged, if they're already talking, do not get involved with your team members. So tell your team members to only fill in the gaps when there's silence in the room. While you're having that dialogue, tell some jokes. Be humorous. If you are a funny person, build on that funny energy altogether. Be silly, share some stories. If something went sideways, then joke about that. Not all of my jokes actually land well with the audience. Sometimes I have found that people just crack up in the room. But there were many times when people didn't laugh with the joke. Maybe I had a funny slide and no one laughed. That's perfectly fine. You can even joke about that, saying, hey guys, that's supposed to be funny, please laugh. That's perfectly fine as well. Be vulnerable. So if you are humorous, if you can actually tell a few jokes, there's something about jokes that actually lighten up the mood in the room, and people will be more engaged overall. A bonus tip for you. You can actually leave your audience with an actionable takeaway, like a toolkit or a checklist that they can apply in their work right after. It can be a quick checklist, a worksheet, or even a ChatGPT prompt. In one of my recent webinars, I actually give people a ChatGPT prompt, and towards the end of the webinar, I got the audience to use the ChatGPT prompt in their work live in front of everyone, so they know how to use that toolkit as well. And if you give them a document or something downloadable that they can take away, they can pass it around in their team as well, and more people will know about your association and the great work that you do. A lot of webinars flop nowadays, but with these ideas applied, your next webinar does not have to be a flop, it can be fire. Try it out.